The obvious question is, can we make the process less cumbersome and quicker? Amy, do you have some thoughts on that?
I think we can. I think you all have described some of the reasons why we haven't been able to quite make it completely seamless for every single consumer. It is very fragmented. I didn't come from this industry, so as I've learned a bunch in the last few years, it's much more fragmented than I ever thought. It's much more siloed than I ever thought. And in any sort of system where you've got that many players and stakeholders, to agree on a single experience is absolutely going to take years and years to get there. I hope that the ups and downs of the market, the way we are adopting digital in our day-to-day life, from Amazon to ordering whatever else online, I hope that drives it a little faster. But we're certainly in a place where you might solve one part of that sort of value chain in a really thoughtful, seamless way, but then they hit up to the next thing, and it's like, to your point, back to zero again on some parts of that. And that's the piece that, until all of the players come together and really try to attack the problem looking from end to end, I think it's going to take us quite some time.
I would agree. Samir, anything to add?
I think it depends on what we want as individuals in the process. It's up to us, right? At the end of the day, we tend to forget that our consumer is the buyer or the client who's refinancing possibly. What experience do they want? A lot of times, and this is just human nature, we worry about ourselves. How can we make our lives easier instead of making their lives or their experience easier or better? So to me, I think, when I think of collaboration amongst, industry leaders, it's really the communication is where I think a lot of the pain points are. I think in the central process of who's communicating, instead of finger pointing, we're not really doesn't seem like we're really looking to create a communication hub, if you will, right? A centralized platform where all parties interested, all parties involved can see what's happening in a transparent way. That's how we build innovation, through transparency, not just, definitely we have to come together as a group and really figure out how to work together, but it starts with us, in my opinion.
Yeah. Corey, the realtor is usually the first person that interacts with the consumer. You have thoughts on that? What is there a change in the consumer's attitude or perception from the beginning to the end based on the interaction with the different players?
So I would start by saying, initially consumers, when they reach out to a realtor, they're excited. They want to go view a house. They don't want to sit down and talk to me for 2 hours about the process, right? Because they're caught up in the emotional part of it. By the end of it, they're just frustrated and they just want it to be over. So, funny story, I was in the shower this morning and thinking about this, and I know that's where everybody comes up with really good ideas, right?
Yes,
and I was thinking, okay, how many times does the average consumer, from the day they decide they want to start looking at houses to the time that they close, either type or write their name? And if you could think about it from that perspective, and this was my brainchild this morning, right? So I can invent an app that I put all of my personal information in, and then I give access to the people that I want to give access to. Yep. That would streamline the whole thing from a customer's perspective. Now, if anybody creates that, you call it the Corey, please. So I just think, if we could think it from a buyer's perspective or a seller's perspective, we could definitely solve all this.
Yeah, I don't know how many times a consumer, I did a study one time about how many times the name and address were entered by all the participants in the transaction. It averaged a little over 80 times.
Wow.
And it's kind of hard to believe that you're going to do it 80 times and not make a mistake. Plus, what a waste of time to do something
right.
80 different times,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So kind of very inefficient. So how do we make it less cumbersome and quicker? What comes to the top of your mind about how you can make it less cumbersome and quicker? What can we do in terms of interaction between the different silos? We're all regulated differently, we're all administered differently, and I'm candidly amazed at how little that's changed over the last 50 years. There's virtually no interaction in terms of process or administration or rules. Thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think to build off of, and just as someone with a very long last name, I can tell you that even when it's your own, if you have to type it 80 times, you're going to make a mistake. But no, building off of Corey's idea, there are a handful of really well thought out and designed POS systems, but there's an argument that we could even go further with that in terms of putting in lanes on access and control to information so that it carries all the way through to the end use consumer. I think that's something that, as we think about sort of next gen POS systems, that's something that technology providers should probably start thinking about. How do we get collaborative all the way through, not just for the single shot that maybe we're using? To Samir's point, this is my use case here, so I'm just going to stop here and not think about sort of the end game, and that's where sometimes more agnostic tech providers, if it's not a homegrown solution, might be able to have the bandwidth, the capacity to really look across the ecosystem to build that POS or front-end system, whatever you want to call it, in a way that can serve the consumer in the way that Corey thought of this morning.
Would a data vault work? I mean, I can tell you that I've been involved in the last 10 years in at least 1,000 different conversations about data vaults, and getting something implemented where we input data one time and then we all share it makes a lot of sense, but a lot of concern over cybersecurity and everything else. Any thoughts on data vaults, Corey?
I think that sounds great. I mean, I don't know, too much about how the technology itself would work, but anything that could streamline for the customer to maybe even want to sell or move faster. Because think about moving in general. It quite frankly sucks, right? I mean, like, everybody hates it. They hate packing, they hate moving, they hate putting stuff away. So if we can solve the pain points in between, I decide, oh wait, I want to move across town or I want to move across country, I mean, that actually might speed up things as well.
So Samir, the lenders typically interact extensively online with the consumer. Do you have any thoughts on how we can use technology to make the consumer feel more empowered or informed?
Yeah, I think I think great ideas across the board here, and it's great to be able to ask a client to fill out information and put it into a vault. I actually take it one step back and saying, how do we pull information? Right? There's some systems out there today where you can enter the last four of your social, and it brings in the information, right? Like, there's data security questions around your first mortgage was in what year, or whatever, the property address and all those things. But I believe that the future consumer, again, I think of my children, they're not gonna have the patience to sit there and type everything in, even to begin with. So how do you have 4 to 5 fields where you can enter some pieces of information and everything pulls into your application, and you're just confirming and making sure that it's accurate and then moving on? So that's, there's a few platforms out there that do that today, but I think that could simply evolve. I will say it hasn't picked up a ton of traction, but I think it will over the years to come with the future consumers.
Yeah. Amy, thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the data vaulting is something, we've talked about, lots of companies talked about different ways to permission that type of information to be able to ingest information, to Samir's point, that's already exists, whether it's in credit bureaus or fill in the blank, the data sources that a KBA or ID verification provider uses, blend that all into the same system to make it, you will even, to your point, Samir, like, just make it that much more seamless for the consumer so that Corey can get out and show houses like right away, as opposed to even sitting there for 1 hour, as opposed to like however many hours you're spending now.